Welcome to 10-Minute Type Advice by Personality Hacker. I'm Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This show features questions from the Personality Hacker community that we answer in about 10 minutes. We've been using personality types in our coaching for years, and we'd love to answer your questions about personal growth through the lens of type. You can find out more about us at personalityhacker.com. Okay, now let's hear today's question.
Hi, Joel and Antonia. I'm an INTP, and I'm fairly confident about that, but I tend to use the effectiveness and perspectives processes fairly often in my daily life. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about the processes that are not in our cognitive function stack, how they relate to the processes that are, and what their relationship is to us. Thanks for your time. Ben.
Thanks, Ben, for the question. So you are an INTP in the Myers-Briggs system, and that would mean that your driver, cognitive function or mental process that you lead with is introverted thinking or accuracy. That's what we've nicknamed it here at Personality Hacker. Your co-pilot would be extroverted intuition. We've nicknamed that exploration. Your 10-year-old is memory or introverted sensing, and your inferior or 3-year-old process is extroverted feeling or harmony. This is what an INTP's mind wiring looks like. This is how your personality type shows up in cognitive functions. And what we hear you saying, Ben, is, but wait a minute, Joel and Antonia, I'm not just using those 4 functions in my car model or cognitive function stack. I'm using other functions like introverted intuition or perspective, something maybe an INTJ or an INFJ would use. And I'm also seeing myself use extroverted thinking or effectiveness, which an INTJ or an ESTJ would use. So what's going on here? Why are these functions showing up, and how can I think about this? The functions that aren't in my stack or in my car, how will they influence my life and my personality and how I show up to the world?
When I hear questions around using functions that are not in one's car model or, as Joel mentioned, stack, I always think 3 different things, or basically 3 different things pop up for me. And the first one is that we all use all 8 functions. So it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that you are accurately identifying times when you are going beyond your first 4 function and dipping into what's often called the shadow functions. The second one is there are certain functions that we are far more encouraged to use than others. So in particular, extroverted thinking or effectiveness is a function that is very much encouraged for people, particularly in careers or in the workforce, or just in trying to get our lives together. Most advice leans heavily towards doing it in an extroverted thinking or effectiveness way. So there are some functions that we get extra training on, even if it's not in our first 4 function stack or car model. And the third thing that comes up is it's sometimes difficult to fillet out what is a pure expression of a single function versus a combination of a couple different functions that can look like that single function. So in your case, as an INTP, let me talk about all 3 of those things that come up for me and specify it to you. So the first one is that we all use all 8. And in particular, we don't have I wouldn't say that we have an antagonistic relationship to our 5th and 6th function. For you, your 5th function will be the same as your dominant or driver function, but in the reversed attitude. So if your dominant function is introverted thinking, what we call accuracy, then your 5th function is going to be extroverted thinking, or what we call effectiveness. If your second auxiliary function is extroverted intuition, then your 6th function is going to be the same, but in the opposite attitude. So it will be introverted intuition, or what we call perspectives. And your 5th and 6th functions are quite accessible to us. They almost feel like cousins. We don't use them as often as we use our dominant and auxiliary, because even though we are familiar with the terrain, like it feels comfortable for you in particular to use a thinking function and an intuitive function, it always feels off when we use them in the opposite attitude than what we are naturally wired to use them in. Meaning that when you use extroverted thinking, it's not going to feel wildly alien, but it's going to feel wrong somehow. Like it's not going to feel as right as using introverted thinking. And when you use introverted intuition, your 6th function, you have access to it, but it's always going to feel a little off. Like you should be using extroverted intuition instead. So you're going to have access to these functions, and they might show up for you in all sorts of time periods, but you're still going to always favor that dominant auxiliary. The second bit is that we are particularly encouraged to use certain functions. And so descriptions of them don't feel like they're not us. And I already mentioned extroverted thinking or effectiveness is one of them. In career, in putting together our lives, in trying to be productive, in taking personal growth advice around productivity and getting your morning going or routines or whatever, a lot of times they are pieces of advice that suit and are from and suit people who use extroverted thinking or effectiveness. Meaning that we all have to manage resources. We all have to live on a timeline of a schedule. We all have to sync our clocks together when we're trying to meet somebody at a certain time period or schedule a meeting or whatever. We all have to figure out our finances, and we all have to figure out our energy management. So in some ways, we all have to do extroverted thinking, and that function doesn't feel, it's not explained in a way that feels esoteric to us. So when we're doing those things, we recognize it, as opposed to something like introverted feeling, which we're also all doing, but there's like an esoteric nature to it. And we're like, am I doing introverted feeling right now? I'm not sure. When you're using extroverted thinking, it's real obvious, right? I'm on this schedule. I'm on this time clock. I'm meeting my responsibilities. I'm getting projects done. I'm making things happen. The difference between how you use introverted thinking and extroverted thinking, though, is going to be very different, meaning that when you're using introverted thinking, that's going to feel right, and you're going to feel more like yourself, and you're actually going to get a reward, like chemical reward from your body for using it. And extroverted thinking is always going to feel like you didn't put enough thought into it, that it's a little too slapdash, like you're implementing too soon. And when you use it, it's never going to feel quite satisfying. You can employ this function, but when you do, it always feels like, man, I wish I put more thought into that. It's also going to feel limiting. Introverted thinking or accuracy lives inside of you. It lives in your inner terrain. And that means there's really no limitation to it except for whatever thoughts you can think. It feels very, very... it feels like all your options are open. It feels like you can think literally anything. And the landscape of your mind is so broad and so complicated and has so much material in it that it's something that you can explore literally your entire life and never reach the end. Extroverted thinking, on the other hand, is very limited. It lives in the outside world. It has to be synced up with other markers outside of ourselves. There's a limitation of time. It's called death, right? We're all going to get to it. And there's also a limitation of resource, of energy, money, time right now. So extroverted thinking is always going to feel limited to you. Introverted thinking is going to feel like it has possibilities and it has all sorts of landscape and all sorts of territory to take in, and you're going to want to be there as much as possible. But when you're forced to use extroverted thinking, you're going to feel it because it will feel like something that is breathing down your neck. All right. Extroverted thinking is always going to feel like something breathing down your neck. And you're not going to get a chemical reward for using it, meaning that when you close a loop, you might be relieved that you were able to get something done and that thing is no longer hanging over your head, but you're not going to get a chemical reward for it like somebody who uses it as their dominant or driver function, like an ETJ would. Introverted intuition is not something that we are necessarily trained into or rewarded for using, but it is something that once you know type is very fun to use. And it's something that feels right. Like when you have those inner intuitions, and for me as an ENTP, this almost always happens in the shower. I'm in the shower. My extroverted sensing part of who I am is, hypnotized by the feeling of the hot water coming down on me. And then all of a sudden I get these creative ideas. There are moments and contexts in which I will also pull on introverted intuition as an NTP, but they're far less rich, rewarding, creative as when I'm using extroverted intuition, when I'm idea generating with another person, when I am blue sky talking, or if I'm in a whiteboard session and I'm pinging my ideas back and forth. In fact, I oftentimes don't know what I'm going to say until I say it, particularly when I'm with another person who's an intuitive. The two of us will be going back and forth, and all of a sudden something that was very unclear before becomes a very obvious and clear pattern to me. I don't have those experiences with introverted intuition nearly as often. I can have them. I can have these moments of insight, but they don't come, they're not nearly as accessible, and they don't come with the same speed that the creative pattern, recognition part of my mind, the patterns that I create, happen when I'm using extroverted intuition. And my guess is it's the same for you. So that's the second thing, is that you might not be rewarded for using it, but you know what it is. And so therefore you might be tapping into it or recognizing when it's happening as it's happening, simply because you're aware of type. But it's not going to be as accessible as those dominant and auxiliary functions are. You're still going to have a better time of it when you use extroverted intuition. And then finally, it's not uncommon for introverted thinking and extroverted intuition, the combination of the two, to appear or be a lookalike for introverted intuition. That's very common. When you're in your inner terrain, that is. When you're inside and your introverted thinking is going and you've been calling patterns in conversation with somebody else, and then you're bringing it back and ruminating on it and figuring it all out, that combination of those two functions when you're inside of yourself can very much be a lookalike for introverted intuition. And the opposite is true as well. Extroverted intuition and introverted thinking in the outside world, as you're getting things done and making patterns and employing things that make sense to you and building tactics and strategies, the combination of those two things in the outside world can also appear to be extroverted thinking. So there might be a lookalike pattern going on, or a lookalike phenomena going on as well. Sometimes you are truly accessing that fifth and sixth function for you, and sometimes you're using your first and second function in combination with each other, and it's appearing like descriptions of the fifth and sixth functions. So all of these things can be happening, and regardless, it's not that big of a deal. It's very common for all of us to be using all these functions. And as you get more and more aware of the nuances of type, sometimes you can fillet those things out, those little nuances out, and sometimes it doesn't matter, right? It's just you using all your functions, and you're totally allowed to do that.
Yeah, I think that really speaks to the nuance of all of this. We have these static stereotype visions in our heads of how each type's supposed to fill in the blank show up. And many people show up differently than the stereotypes would say. And I think we're getting to the heart of that. Like, behavior can come from different emergence. It doesn't all come from the same place. So two different types can exhibit the same behavior. The behavior isn't the type. The mental wiring is the type. And I think that's really the most important point out of all of this to remember if you're listening right now, is that it goes much deeper into the wiring of your mind than just the behavior you're exhibiting. Thanks again so much for the question, Ben. Really appreciate it. You can ask your own question about personality types or personal growth. Visit personalityhacker.com/questions. We also have programs designed to help you with your personal growth through the lens of personality types. Again, visit personalityhacker.com and find the program that's made just for you. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Thank you for listening to 10-Minute Type Advice by Personality Hacker. We'll talk with you on the next episode. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision-making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action-focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.